Let me just start by saying welcome to our discussion this afternoon. This group of ladies are all representatives of their organisations with the 6O group. The 6O group is a group of the largest women's organisations in the UK, the National Federation of Women's Institute, Towns Women's Guilds, British Professional Women, National Council of Women, British Federation of Women Graduates, and Sir Optimist International GB. We share information about our campaigns and priorities, as all of us place women at the heart of what we do. Our chairman for this discussion is Patrice Wellesley-Cole. She is the immediate past president of British Federation of Women Graduates, a barrister and former London Tribunal judge. She's also an honorary fellow of St Hugh's College, Oxford, her alma mater. So without more ado, over to you, Patrice.
Thank you very much, Penny, for the welcome. And it's a privilege to be here today to discuss this very important topic, writing women into history. We're celebrating the achievements of women in history by writing them into history. And by doing so, we embrace their facets and intersections of ethnicity, faith, and gender. Where are the plaques, streets named after women, and statues of them? This topic is timely because it chimes with the International Women's Day and CSW 65 session theme. As we all know, it's the 25th anniversary of the 4th Women's Conference. We are also at the beginning of the 2020 to 2030 UN Decade for Action to deliver the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This crisis is highlighted both by the centrality of our contributions as women and what women did in history, and the disproportionate burdens we carry, or many of us carry. Now, without further ado, I would like to call on our first speaker. Please introduce your name and your organization. We do have a time limit, and we're going to do it in 2 stages. So the first question we're going to address is about a woman you consider should be in the history books. So I'll now give the floor to Rhian Connick of NFWI. Rhian.
I'm going to speak about Madge Watt. Madge Watt was born in 1868 in Canada. She was a feminist and author and was involved in the early days of the WI in Canada. She moved to England in 1913, and when World War I broke out, she realised that an agricultural effort was now needed to organise women, and set about spreading the ideals of women's institutes based on the Canadian model. The Agriculture Organisation Society offered some funds to help with this, and Madge was invited to speak to a group of women in Llanfair PG in Anglesey, North Wales, in September 1915, and there formed the first Women's Institute in the UK. Madge went on to help set up 100 WIs across England and Wales, and the movement quickly spread. Madge returned to Canada in 1919, became the president of the Women's Institute Advisory Board in British Columbia, and joined the International Council of Women. In 1933, she set up the Associated Country Women of the World and became the first president, and remained in that position until 1947. ACWW now has non-governmental status at the United Nations, and one of the founding members was the WI. She believed that women could and should show leadership and help other women realise their potential for good. That women had a right to higher education, access to careers and opportunities, and to express themselves through their skills and talents. She was named a Person of National Historic Significance by the Canadian government in 2007. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhian, for that interesting contribution. I now call on Lynn Stubbings, also of NFI. Lynn, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Hello,
Katrina.
Lynn, yes.
Hello, yes.
Yes, give the floor to Lynn.
I'm Lynn Stubbings and I'm the National Chair of the NFWI. And I'm going to talk about our first National Chairman, Lady Denman. Lady Gertrude Denman was born in 1884 and was the daughter of Baron Cowdray, the oil magnate and newspaper baron. She was a good businesswoman and also experienced in committee work and was involved with the Women's Liberal Federation and supported the women's suffrage movement. In 1903, she married Thomas, the third Baron Denman, who was later appointed Governor-General of Australia. Whilst there, she was given the duty of announcing the name of the new Australian capital, Canberra, in a lavish ceremony, still available to see online. They returned home in 1914. The first WI was formed in 1915, and in 1917, Lady Denman was elected the first national chairman. As a landowner in Sussex, she saw how hard life could be for country women and tried to make life a little easier, providing piped water and sanitation for her tenants, a rare luxury in those days. Following World War I, she funded the building of a village hall in Balcombe to commemorate the fallen of the village. She believed strongly in the right and ability of women to conduct their own affairs and was a remarkable leader, not only of the WI. Amongst other things, she was also the first chairman of the Family Planning Association, president of the Ladies Golf Union, and a trustee of the Carnegie United Kingdom Trust. At the outbreak of the Second World War, she became the director of the Women's Land Army and was also responsible for organising the evacuation of inner city children to country areas. She finally retired as chairman of the WI in 1946 and died in 1954, aged 70. In 2017, the members of the Sussex Federations of WIs organised a blue plaque to commemorate Lady Denman on the Victory Hall in Balcombe to mark the centenary of her becoming our first national chairman.
We've learned a great deal. Thank you so much for that, Lynn. As you know, BFWG used to go to Denman for our conferences. So I'll now turn to Helen Ashworth of BPW. Yes, Helen.
Everyone, I'm Helen Ashworth and I'm the National President of the Federation of Business and Professional Women in the United Kingdom. And how odd that we are all talking about women who have founded our various organisations. I'm going to talk about Lena Madison Phillips. She was actually born Anna Lena Phillips on September the 15th in 1881 in Nicholasville in Kentucky. She was the daughter of a judge and she had 4 step siblings. Her middle name was in honor of her father's first wife, Selena, but she called herself Lena. She took the name Madison from one of her brother's names. I suppose it's because it's reminiscent of the word médecin, and one of her brothers became a doctor. Of course, born in 1881, she wasn't always due to have education, but she did. At the age of 7, she was enrolled in the Jasmit Female Institute. It sounds more like a prison, doesn't it? And she studied every subject. And of course, she wanted in the beginning to be a concert pianist, but she became ill and lost her ability to practice and do things. So in fact, she took on the role with her father and became a lawyer. She actually attended the Women's College of Baltimore, where her studies also included music, but she decided that she would stick with law. She did a little bit of teaching before she became a lawyer, though. She attended the University of Kentucky, which was hard, But when she graduated, she completed law school in 1917, and she was the first woman to graduate with full honours, and she had the highest marks for her entire law class. When she graduated, she went back to Nicholasville and started in practice. She actually travelled to New York with her work as an attorney for the YWCA, but it was as a businesswoman or as someone who founded business women's clubs that she came to notice. In July in 1919, at a convention in St. Louis, she started the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs in the United States. She also helped to found an independent newspaper. She did a master's degree, but really why I'm talking about her was that she decided to travel to Europe. And she traveled all around Ireland and the United Kingdom and the mainland of Europe, talking to women about women's clubs. The short story is that in 1938, she founded or completed the foundation of the International Federation of Business and Professional Women. And the Federation of the UK is one of the 5 founder members. So in 1938, Austria, Canada, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom with the United States founded the International Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. We are, of course, a worldwide organization. She continued to go abroad and work all the way around the world. It was in 1955, on her way to one of the Arab countries, to the Middle East for a meeting, that she died when she was in Marseille in France. But her body was returned to Jasmit County in Kentucky, and she was buried in the Maple Grove Cemetery in Nicholasville. So, of course, BFWG was founded by an American woman. And I must say at this point that I don't know how she's commemorated in Nicholasville. Thank you.
Most grateful, Helen. That was inspiring. I will now move on to Sheila Petersen from NCW. Sheila, you have the floor.
Thank you, Patrice. I'm Sheila Petersen, and I'm the Vice-President of the National Council of Women of Great Britain. Sorry, glasses. I offer the first president of the NCW, Louise Crichton, as a woman worthy of writing into history. The 1890s were awash with a host of female societies concerned with moral reform, women's employment, the Ladies' Sanitary Association, for example. And many of these early women's organizations held conferences which were coordinated in the early years of the 1890s. In 1895, the Central Conference Committee was dissolved and a new consolidating organization was formed, known as the National Union of Women's Workers. This later became known as the National Council of Women. Louise Crichton was an author and wife of the Bishop of London and was the first president of the NUWW conference in 1895. One of the papers presented was by Millicent Fawcett on granting women's suffrage, a contentious issue and hotly debated in the early years. Louise was initially opposed to the ideas of votes for women, but later announced she was no longer a member of the anti-suffrage movement. She herself was more of a suffragist rather than a suffragette, and worked tirelessly in the early years in developing the primary function of NCW as we know it today, that is in formulating, researching, discussing, and voting on resolutions which are then presented to the government. Branches of the organization were formed throughout the country, and it became affiliated to the International Council of Women, a strong link which remains to the present day.
Wonderful presentation, Sheila. Well done. And we now pass on to our president, Jasmit from BFWG. Yes, Jasmit.
Okay. I'm Jasmit Phull, and I'm the president of British Federation of Women Graduates. Princess Sophia Alexandrovna Dulip Singh was a prominent suffragette in the United Kingdom. She was the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. Her father, Maharaja Sir Dulip Singh, was kidnapped by the British Crown and exiled to England. Her grandfather was Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was the leader of the Sikh Empire in India. Sophia's mother was Maharani Bamba, brought up by Christian missionaries. Her father was German and her mother was Ethiopian, living in Cairo. Sophia, Emmeline Pankhurst, and a group of activists went to the House of Commons in 1910 to meet the Prime Minister. The Home Secretary ordered the expulsion, and many women were seriously injured, and this incident was called Black Friday. Sophia tried to fall in front of the Prime Minister's car while holding a poster reading, "Give women the vote," but she was never arrested. She volunteered as a British Red Cross nurse, and the Sikh soldiers could hardly believe that the granddaughter of Maharaja Ranjit Singh sat by their bedside in nurse's uniform. Sophia eventually received a place of honor in the suffragette movement alongside Emmeline Pankhurst. Her sole aim in life, which she attained, was the advancement of women. Queen Victoria had given Sophia an elaborately dressed doll named Little Sophie, which became her proud possession, and near the end of her life, she gave the doll to Drovna, her housekeeper's daughter. And I must say, I'm also a Seroptimist. Thank you, Patrice.
Yes, much appreciated, Madam President. Yes, I'm also an honorary member of TG, so some of us wear both hats, or a few hats. Yes, we'll now move on to Liz from SIGB, Seroptimist. Yes, Liz.
Thank you, Patrice. This is so exciting to hear about all these women. In 1921, Seroptimist International was set up. So this year we celebrate our centenary worldwide. And we set a challenge to our members in our federation to run something called the Who Is She campaign, where we've asked clubs to identify members from the past and the present who've made a difference to the lives of women and girls in a substantial way. Well, we've been inundated with nominations. So to try and choose one from the 70 odd women that I've had from the past, but I've chosen my favorite, my personal heroine. And that's not to say the others aren't wonderful too. Elizabeth Hawes was an optician by profession. She was born in the late 19th century, and she was a founder member of the Greater London Club. And she did become president of our federation in 1938. And that year, the convention was held in Atlantic City in New Jersey, and she went over there as president. She was appointed international liaison officer by voting of the clubs at the convention. And you can imagine in 1938, the storm clouds were gathering over Europe. And in that role, Elizabeth led the work to secure the safe passage of 30 refugees from Vienna to final safety in the USA with American Seroptimists. The clubs in Vienna had had their accounts frozen and their funds sequestered by the Nazi occupiers. As the war progressed, Elizabeth was personally responsible for shipping parcels of aid, including money and clothing, from Seroptimists in the UK and the USA to stricken cities throughout Europe. I imagine her house must have looked something like an Amazon warehouse. And the president of the European Federation at the time, Dr. Madeleine Jarot, later said that she had had to hide her Seroptimist minutes and papers under the coal in her hearth to stay safe. So it was a frightening time for European Seroptimists. A Red Cross telegram from Elizabeth to Madeleine saying only the words, "working hard and hopeful," inspired them to carry on. At the convention in 1946, after the war, Elizabeth pledged herself and the organisation to the new UN, which of course was then in its infancy. I'm hoping that she would be pleased to know that SIGB holds special consultative status with the UN through ECOSOC now. She died in 1966, having given 42 dedicated years of service to Soroptimists International during some of the most difficult times for our organisation. Thank you.
Most grateful, Liz, yes. Now we'll turn to our own Vice President, Carrie. Yes, Carrie. I know you've done a lot of work on women in streets and we got your very interesting spec. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Patrice. As Patrice said, I'm a Vice President of BFWG. I'm also on an affiliated trust, which I only mention because it's the Sybil Campbell Trust, and Sybil was a barrister and the first woman in the UK to hold judicial office and was a key member of the Federation, but I haven't chosen her. Now, there are many women who have left a legacy in biographical works and who perhaps need introducing to a wider audience, including names already mentioned by many of you, Lady Denman, Madge Watch, Sophie Singh and the like. But I took the remit rather to look at lesser known women for the moment who have either no full-length biographies or are just generally not so well known. As Patrice said, I'm currently collating information to produce mini biographies of women who have had street names after them. And this has picked up many largely unknown women and their achievements and stories. Through that project and others, as our earlier speaker said, I've been spoilt for choice. I wanted to talk about the first woman chartered surveyor, Irene Barclay, who had an outstanding impact on the housing association movement. Or maybe Polly Hurst Simpson, an indefatigable and somewhat startling woman who was the first agricultural advisor to the Women's Institute. But in coming down to one person who does have some biographical work, but is perhaps less well known than others, I'm going to say Amy Dillon, 1845 to 1935. She inherited her father's failed spelter works in Swansea along with his debts, turning it round into a multi-million-pound operation, but refusing to live anywhere but cheap lodgings until all the debts had been paid off some 10 years after her inheritance. But her business interests and acumen were riven through with social conscience. She was particularly interested in saving the 300 jobs at the works and paying the debts as much as anything else. She wrote novels which often highlighted class issues. She took on public office, local health and education boards, and was a thoughtful philanthropist and social reformer, supporting a women's strike in one instance. She referred to her close female friend, Olive Talbot, as her wife, and often in later life wore men's clothes and smoked a cigar, and has been the subject of gender studies. But I think she should be included for reasons far wider than having a female wife. If part of the purpose of biography is to inspire and provide role models, then Amy Dillon enthusiastically and with fortitude, and initially in very trying circumstances, ploughed an independent furrow, refused to be bound by class, gender, or the expectations of society, and taking on a failing business and her many other works and activities.
Thank you, Carrie. Good to know about somebody that perhaps not many of us knew too much about. We'll now turn to Yitka Graham from NCW. Yes, Yitka.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Dr. Yitka Graham. I'm one of the national elected members to the National Council of Women. My passion is health and social care. And I think it's sort of only natural that I'm given an opportunity to discuss somebody who I think has been very inspirational to me, but I think in terms of a strong woman who should be recognized for her contribution to humankind is Dame Cecily Saunders. She was born in Hertfordshire in 1918 and she died in London in the hospice she founded in 2005. She's a nurse by profession, but not just an exemplar to the nursing profession, but I think as a woman and as a human being. She was responsible for, as I say, for setting up the first hospice movement in London, which was 1965. but the roots that underpinned how she came about to do this are rooted in nursing. And she nursed sort of many people after the atrocities of the Holocaust during World War II. Many of the patients and the victims ended up in London. And she nursed one particular man, and she noticed as he was dying, she sat with him because he had no family. He was alone in a strange country. And she listened to what he had to say. And as he was dying, he reflected on his life, what had happened, and died what she felt was a peaceful death and a really good death. And she was inspired by that particular encounter to look at, you know, how we would die a good death. So it's not just clinical, it's the biological, it's the social, it's the spiritual and the emotional aspects of dying. And at the time, dying wasn't a conversation that we had, that, you know, it wasn't an open subject, it was something that was sort of tucked away. And she really brought that conversation to light. And that was the reason, you know, and that was the rationale for setting up the St. Christopher's Hospice. I would also think at the time, if we look at that traditional medical hierarchy, to be a nurse and challenge these things and start these conversations and change the way we conceptualize and think about dying, I think is an amazing thing to do. And I just think of sort of the obstacles and maybe some of the barriers she encountered while trying to legitimize these conversations. I think one thing to note is she was a strong advocate for pain management. So she didn't wait until the medication had worn out. There was never a gap in that pain management. So that you know, the pain release was given. And I think particularly for conditions that are quite painful at end of life, for example, cancer, but she argued and she fought for adequate pain medication, which again improved quality of life at a time when many people are quite vulnerable. So I think for me, she embodied, you know, compassion, which is what the root of nursing is. And I think she legitimized those conversations about the dying, and she tirelessly campaigned for these issues throughout her life. And I think she leaves a wonderful legacy. And I would say for me, it's especially poignant in the current pandemic when we've lost far too many people to COVID-19. You know, death is an everyday conversation now, but the compassion that she fought for, I think is evident now. So the conversations we have, you know, about people dying meaningful deaths, albeit in a very, very difficult circumstances, I think that conversation remains true, and I think is informing a lot of practice that we carry through today. And I think that is sort of my motivation for nominating Cecily. And I think that legacy needs to be legitimized as a woman, as a nurse, and I think as an incredible humanitarian. Thank you.
Good. Yes. Grateful for that contribution, Yitka. I will turn, of course, to Penny. We know that Eva Habolt is your person, Penny.
I'd like to talk about Eva Hubbock. TG has two ladies who were acknowledged as founders, Marjorie Corbett Ashby, and much lesser known was Eva. Eva came in at the tail end of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. And when that became the National Union of Societies for Equal Citizenship, she became the Parliament representative, if you like. She was always in Parliament, lobbying, attending committee meetings, and keeping a good eye on what was going on. In 1928, after all women got the vote, Eva unfortunately was quite ill. She was visited in her sickbed by Marjorie Corbett, who said, well, what are we going to do now? You know, we've got all these women now who've got the vote. How are we going to tell them how to use it? How are we going to make sure that they know how to be good citizens? And Eva stepped up to the mark and was a prime mover. Marjorie was an ideas woman. She was a great public affair, PR for the organisation. But Eva had solid ideas. She had contacts within the WI as well, and was very keen on not reinventing the wheel. So a number of the original TG models followed WI setups. and still do in some respects. Ava left the movement. We don't know quite what happens, but she was a lady who tended to get a little bit bored once she got things going, and went on to become the principal of Morley College, which anybody in London would be able to tell you is adult education provision for those who left school without too much qualification. But her legacy lives on in our determination that at the root of what we do, there is some education element, even while we're having fun and making friends.
Well, most interesting, Penny. In fact, I even did a short course at Morley College, so it's very dear to my heart. Now, we're going to move on to the second stage, but before we do that, Penny is going to outline the issues, and we can think what is happening now, and more examples of women into reaching top positions. So I'm now going to give the floor again to Penny to outline the issues and how we can really invigorate our movement to try and get more women written into history. Yes, Penny, what would you like to say?
It's one thing to identify women from the past, and there are many projects such as the ones Liz and Carrie have spoken about that will help us to fill out those details. We need them, and we need more. We mustn't stop filling out the past, but we also need to think about how we can ensure that the history books will record women in the future in the same number and on the same basis as men. There's been a lot of progress in women's advancement. I mean, in some subjects, women outnumber men by a great deal at university level. Women are now in highest positions of state in some places. Kamala Harris is now Vice-President of the US. But the pandemic and some of the policies of the current government have been a setback for women. How can we, through our groups, work towards overcoming these issues? And what are you doing at the moment? What will you do in the future? So I'm going to turn over to you. If you
Okay, thank you for that, Penny. All right, now, as I say, this is the second stage, so it's really how we go about getting more women written into history. Now, I know many of our organizations have had projects, but please let me know, or let us know, how you think this can be done practically. As I said, it's very timely with this decade of action for the SDGs. Yes, who'd like to have the floor? Yes, I recognize, is it Rhian? Yes, Rhian, could you, Rhian from NFWI, can you unmute yourself, please? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a project that's in Wales at the moment called the Purple Plaques. It's a very informal group of women's organisations, of which the WI is a member, and we the aim is to because there are so many blue plaques, and some of them obviously are for women, but the majority of them are for men. So the aim of the Purple Plaques is to recognise women and the role that they've played in the community.
Yes.
It has to be a woman who's deceased, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman who is famous. You know,
No, I think, yes, that's a very good point. I should have said that at the beginning, that they don't have to be famous.
No.
Women are at the front line in many professions, especially during the pandemic, and they need to be recognised.
That's right.
Yes, would anybody else like to contribute? Yes, Carrie, what would you like to say, Carrie?
What I was just going to say a few words about was what you were saying is what we're going to do in the future. Obviously, recalling the past is very close to my heart, as you know. But in terms of the future and women in senior office and that sort of thing that you were talking about, I think the pandemic has really highlighted the practicalities, because we all know, whether from personal experience or the past, a lot of women have said, well, I am in high office, but I chose not to have children. We all know there's overachievers that are running countries with 3 kids and all that. But actually, for most people, those practicalities of I've seen it myself, you know, you're in important meetings and you've got to say, well, I've got to go now because there's nobody else to pick them up from school or from the childcare. So I think it's practicalities, and I think that's important. Where we have to also embrace, to some extent, is the wider view that some of the things that senior office, and I'm not necessarily talking about running countries at this point, but senior professional roles are not particularly healthy for men in the way that we run them. And actually, I think we have to think wider about hours, about attitudes. I mean, a lot of men will say they don't take the paternity leave, they don't take the part-time role to share because of the way it's perceived.
Yes, that is a good point, Carrie. Yes,
I haven't got the answers right here.
No. You touch on a lot of it. Yes, the practicalities.
Yeah, and changing
that's what we need. Yes.
To make to get beyond that pyramid, whereas you rightly said, as Penny said, at a lot of universities, I think veterinary medicine, something like 80 or 90% women. Medicine and law are over 50%.
We know parity, gender parity. Yes,
like that. They're not 50% at the top.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. Yes, would anybody else like to say something? Yes. Yes, of course. Liz, I recognise Liz. Yes, Liz.
Thank you very much, Patrice. Yes, I think building on what Rhian and Carrie have said already, but the fact that during the pandemic, you know, it was an awful lot of women that did an awful lot of good in their communities. We were particularly influential, I think, as community groups and organisations. And I don't know about the rest of you, but we've certainly recruited members because people have suddenly felt this feeling of community that for some people was lacking. And we've always had it because we've always been part of groups. But these women were making masks and scrub bags and picking up shopping and picking up prescriptions. I know men did it too. I'm not saying we were the only ones, but they had a particularly significant role, certainly in our community, the ones that we've seen. And I think the other thing is, and I know you may not all hold with the honours system, but there has been the opportunity to nominate people who've worked hard during COVID for honours. And we certainly nominated a woman locally here who was absolutely delighted. I mean, she did sterling work during the first lockdown and continues, and she's well into her 80s, but she's still working hard. So I think maybe recognising the women in our community that have done great things, whether they're our members or not, they deserve the credit for what they've achieved during COVID, I think.
Absolutely, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Yitka, what would you like to say, Yitka?
Hi, I just thank you for that. I just think on a sort of more fundamental, I think there's a couple of things. I think first of all, as we said, things are difficult in the pandemic with social distancing. And I just think sort of overall, I don't have all the answers. I've got loads of ideas, but I think just embracing the power of social media about raising awareness of things. I'd also say something, we did a project at the University of Sunderland with the National Glass Centre, which is one of our resources, but just almost thinking the value of visual and creative arts as a way of raising awareness. We did a particular project called Rebel Women of Sunderland, and we use visual representation. So sometimes it's not just the written word, it's other things. But I'd also say, and just you know, what was said before about the everyday heroes. It's not, you know, you don't have to be running a country to be making a significant contribution and raising awareness. So, and I think just the example before about women making masks, you know, we can change the world one conversation at a time. We can't do it all ourselves, but I think it's harnessing that collective. And I think maybe something about, which I'm passionate about doing, is engaging with younger girls and building that philosophy in, that we build each other up. We don't knock each other down, but working together and embracing that and making that a normal conversation. You know, we shouldn't have to be, this shouldn't be sort of an item on agenda. We should be, you know, in an ideal world, this would happen naturally. We shouldn't have to fight for our place. But I think just sometimes looking at what we have and how we can come together and do that, and just embracing what we have and what's available.
Most grateful, yes. Anybody else like to make any points? Yes, of course, Penny. And then Jasmit. Yes, Penny.
Yeah, my concern is about education. There is still a body of people that say, oh, you don't want to bother with maths and science to women. They're for men. And it's the parents and the teachers that are saying that. I'm not all, all parents. But we have got to get out into the media that maths isn't something to be frightened of. Maths is actually something which opens the doors to being, well, for example, an astrophysicist or a space scientist. Even a doctor or teacher requires mathematics as a basis. Everybody should have an basic understanding of science. I have been into schools and seen girls being pushed to the back of a class because the teacher doesn't feel it's worth teaching them. Now,
yes.
That's a while ago, and I'm hoping that that's not happening anymore.
I hope not.
I am very much aware that our education system is moving rapidly into a co-ed system, whereas girls' schools actually seem to be able to achieve more academic results in those areas. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes. Anything else you want to add? Because I was going to go to Jasmit now. Yes. Thank you. Yes, Jasmit, what would you like to say?
I personally think, having I belong to BFWG and Sir Optimist, and the number of years I've belonged to both these organizations. And you do come across some people, who really are outstandingly wonderful people. And what comes to my mind is, we are all here from 6 organizations. And if BFWG feels there's one person there, then we are talking to ourselves. But if we bring this to the 6O and, and discuss that, and then we all try and make an impact, a big impact. And I think that's what is needed, a big impact, rather than, just in a small way. And we could work on something, together and try and recognize more people to come into this forefront.
Yes, thank you. Lynn, I can't see you. Do you want to say something, Lynn?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes, I thought so, Lynn. Please speak up, because yes. Well,
just
roll on, Lynn.
Partly to pick up, thank you. Partly to pick up on what Liz was saying about how all our members have come to the fore and stepped up to the plate during this past year with, working in their communities and doing all sorts of marvelous things. But also going back to the honours system as well, I know that the government department are keen for more women to be recognised, and only a couple of years ago had a big push probably through your organisations as well, but certainly through the WI, about us recognising more women to put forward for honours. But I also wonder whether picking up on Penny's point about science and etc. as a career, whether this pandemic has actually highlighted so many top women scientists, because I think it's wonderful how many of the scientists that are interviewed on TV and on social media, etc., are women. And I think hopefully that will inspire a lot of young women who are at school, at university, to actually think, these women are making a huge difference and a huge contribution to our national life. And, I want to do that as well, hopefully. Yes. So I think there is, out of this awful situation, maybe there's a glimmer of hope there.
Well, that was food for thought. Yes, thank you for that, Lynn. What would you like to say, Helen?
I've been doing some work with the French and German federations on Equal Pay Day lately. And it's this inability, it seems to me, to be able to work together. The Fawcett Society has one date in the year, in November-ish, round about then, for Equal Pay Day. BPW Europe has another Equal Pay Day. We in the BPW UK have an Equal Pay Day in March. And it frustrates me when different women's groups do different things. I think that the pandemic has made it so important that every woman's group works together. I'm a seroptimist too. And when I look at BPW, seroptimism, Federation of Women's Institutes, Town Women's Guilds, National Council of Women, we're all doing virtually the same thing. But if we all work together, then we'd shout even louder. And I'm sorry, but I do feel that this government does need shouting at.
Yes,
You may not agree.
yes, we hold our government to account.
We do.
Yes.
Just to echo, it was just to echo what Jasmit and Helen have said, that we should work together. And maybe as the 6-0, we have one, we have our own resolutions at our own AGMs, but maybe just for once we come up with a single issue that we all plug into. Would be a tremendous, but the decision is which one to adopt, but I'm sure we can do it.
Great. Yes, now I think everybody's had their say, so it falls on me now to sum up, and we can have some takeaways. Sorry, not tasty Indian ones, but some takeaways. Now, it seems to me that many of us, because we already have worked together, we have commonalities. And it's interesting, the themes that came out of our short discussion. Some of us chose the leaders of our organizations. But what was very striking was that all the women we proposed had a social conscience, they were social reformers, they were philanthropic, and many of them were pioneers. So these seem to be the common themes. And they also seem to be from a certain era. Some of them were famous, some were not. And we all agreed that sometimes it's the ordinary, in inverted commas, women who are the heroines, everyday heroines, the NHS nurse, the cleaners. We need to give praise where it's due.
Yes.
And my view, and I think many of us believed this, is that the pandemic has actually brought out the best in many of us. And this is what has really kept us going through this very challenging time. So we've got these everyday heroines. How do we write them into history? Well, the honours system, as many of you said, not many women do have honours. Statues, we can pay for them ourselves. We can lobby the MPs. We've got the chair of the Women and Equality Committee. We can lobby them and say more women should be recognised. Many of us do research into women. But what perhaps is most significant is that we agreed we should work together because it has a greater impact. And we're already doing that because we meet twice a year. So perhaps we can think of various projects or various women that should be emulated in our society when we meet. But as I say, the common theme was that all the women we chose were altruistic. They thought of other people. We live in a modern age, and women are promoted through social media. It's a huge tool. And I believe we're going to have a link, and this can go out on our social media channels, Facebook and Twitter, and that will get people talking about the importance of women, International Women's Day, her story. As somebody said, International Women's Day shouldn't be on one day, it should be every day. And we need to make sure it's every day. Well, the time has come to say goodbye, but before I do that, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Penny for organising this wonderful get together of the 6-0. Please raise your hands for Penny. And I think we'd all agree, a happy, fruitful, inspiring and eventful International Women's Day event. We've learned a lot from one another, at least I have anyway. We know it's not until the 8th, it is the 8th of course, and we feed into our international organisations. With us it's Graduate Women International. Many of our organisations have UN consultative status. So this is a very important component. So I'm glad that it's going to be recorded, and I hope it'll be widely put on our social media platforms. It's time to say goodbye. We can't offer one another a drink, which is a shame, but what we have got, and this is very important, we have a very short video of the 20 women leaders in the world. They're either heads of government or heads of state. Now, you may have seen it, and you may not have known there were so many women who headed governments and countries in the world. And fortunately, I managed to get it, and I think Penny will be able to show it now, won't we? It's less than 5 minutes, but that's how we're going to end. And it's inspiring because it shows you how far they got and how far any woman can get. So thank you very much. This has been an evening of solidarity.